Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Breaking History. I'm your host, Gordon McCormick, and today Matt is actually traveling this week. So fortunately, I was able to bring a friend on. Somebody you'll recognize, Brady, War Hamster. How are you today, Brady?
Doing great, and always a privilege to sit in for Matt.
Yeah. Excited to have you here. I was talking to Brady about this, and this is really timely because I've actually been wanting to get together with him and have this discussion. We're going to talk today about various aspects of the financial system that's happening right now, the financial narratives, I guess you'd say, that are happening right now, particularly gold. There's a discussion about auditing the Fed. That's something that Brady and I have speculated on for many, many years, that the necessity to do it and what that may look like. We're also going to discuss the stories about the gold, the large volumes of gold moving around. Brady has some insight into that. We're also going to get to the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Is it constitutional? We'll have that debate. And then also, how would it work, assuming that it is constitutional and we could make it happen. And then I think we'll wrap up with a discussion on the mineral rights that were potentially are going to be awarded by Putin and Zelensky from Ukraine. And then there's also another narrative about the Democratic Republic of Congo, that their president offering Trump the minerals there in exchange for diplomacy or help resolving the issues they're having with Rwanda. So before we do any of that, let's hear from our sponsor, Goldco, today. I'm sorry. I did not have the copy ready. Let me try that again. Are you ready for the golden age? With recent headlines buzzing about Fort Knox, it's time to shine a light on gold. We've seen questions like, is there really gold in Fort Knox? And is the government secretly moving it? But the real question is, are we going back to the gold standard? In a world where economic stability is uncertain, gold remains a timeless asset. Fort Knox, the fortress of America's gold reserves, is under scrutiny, and this might be the moment gold proves its worth once again. Don't miss out on helping to secure your future. Gold isn't just an investment. It can help safeguard against inflation, currency devaluation, and economic turmoil. Whether it's for you or your retirement as a family heirloom or just to have that peace of mind, this is a perfect time to buy gold. Only time will tell if we are going back to the gold standard. Help secure your wealth now. Visit badlandsgold.com to learn how you can add gold to your portfolio. That's badlandsgold.com.
Well, it's a pretty timely advertisement considering the topics on the table today.
I know. And honestly, that copy, I didn't pre-read the copy, and it's like, wow, I should have just read the copy for the ad as the promo for the intro for the show. So let's start with Fort Knox. So the narratives that are out there right now, Elon has kind of been trolling, just being Elon, talking about Fort Knox, talking about wanting to audit Fort Knox. That was something that Trump did many times during the campaign. I feel like he's been doing that for a few years, where he's like, is there gold in Fort Knox? I've always heard, there, the issues with the gold in Fort Knox, and everyone's always asked that question. And so now it sounds like we are actually going to get the audit. You have congressmen openly posting audit the Fed. I mean, that's something that both Rand Paul and his father have been saying for many years. But now more and more, I guess you'd say uniparty aligned people are also now calling for that. And so it seems inevitable. Elon has been alluding to potentially just doing a live stream of walking through and seeing if the gold is in there, which would be kind of a callback to, didn't in the 1970s, they do something where they brought cameras in and they opened up one vault and it was full, and they're like, oh yeah, look, the gold's great. All right, see you later. And didn't open up any of the other vaults.
Yeah. And it's a great topic because, to be honest with you, nobody knows, where the gold is. If Fort Knox has the gold that it's claimed. That'd be something nice to know. You'd think the rest people, in the rest of the world, countries that trade with us and rely on our reserves to be what they're supposed to be, you would think that would be of prime importance. Yeah, we're going to hit on 1971 and 2073 on a few topics today. So I think the way to look at this is, you mentioned the audit in the mid 70s. That had to do with that, but it was 71 where Nixon took us off the gold standard. And to be honest with you, we don't really know where all the gold is. It just has not been audited. It's not clear. The official records, if we're going to believe them, has the United States having about 8,133 tons of gold in reserves. That's more than 2.5 times the second biggest nation, which is Germany at 3.35 thousand tons. You got Italy at 2.45 thousand, and you go down the list of France, Russia, China, Switzerland, Japan, India, and Netherlands. So those are the total holdings that are officially reported. Now they'll tell us that the amount of gold here. I've got the descriptive on that. Let's pull that up. I always like this slide.
All right, yeah, share your screen and I'll throw it up there.
Bear with me. There it is. They tell us there's been about somewhere around 200 to 240,000 metric tons of gold ever mined in the history. So this little brick down here it's a square cube of all the gold that's about 21 meters on each side, basically about the size of a basketball court. Now, that has always seemed hard for me to believe, and I love the context next to the Great Pyramid. That's just how little there is.
Yeah. That does seem really hard to believe that that's all the gold that. So would that be the gold that's been mined and converted into bricks, or is that all the gold, including like gold jewelry, gold coins, like everything?
It's supposed to be everything, all the gold that's ever been mined.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. What else do I have here? I got the. Here's all your gold mining nations. So I'm a little slow on the mouse today.
It's all right.
We're looking for areas in the gold, but do you notice a pattern where all those big deposits are? Awful lot of the last century have been hotspots. I mean, you look at the African sections where those big mines are.
So that right there, number 8 is the Democratic Republic of Congo. So that's what we've been talking about. Yep. I believe that is Mali, number 9. And then, I see Peru is Pueblo Viejo. Is that Peru? I don't see Peru highlighted, but interesting.
Yeah, number 4, I believe that is Peru.
It's interesting that Peru. So because I know Peru historically was known for its silver, and Mexico was where the Spanish found all the gold. But that is interesting. Okay, all right. Anyway, I digress.
Well, no, it's important because first of all, does everybody know where gold comes from in the first place? How do we get gold on this planet? And I don't think most people know that. It's believed that most of the precious metals came a couple 100 million or whatever years ago when asteroids slammed into the Earth's core. Our Earth's core is mostly made up of iron. There's gold. You'll always find traces usually buried in iron. And that's why it's a little hard to extract. I had another really good chart that showed you how much gold had gone up, and I don't know where I put it. Maybe I've got that over here. This one's telling. Okay, I don't have it. What's interesting is the more modern mining techniques, we've been pulling more gold out over the last 5 years than any period in history. It's really grown fast. And shoot, I can't believe I lost that. I had it all ready for us. But anyways, there's a lot of gold. Bottom line is there's probably a ton more gold beneath the surface that we haven't gotten to. I guess Elon's boring company has not figured out how to get down there yet, but that's something I might be investing in. But it's funny. Gold, why is it money? About 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, civilizations from all over the planet that had never had contact with each other all decided that gold was a store of value. It was going to be used as money, and it was all independently. They didn't. Well, theoretically, they didn't know each other unless you want to go into an Atlantis theory, which probably isn't today's topic. But it just popped up, and it's been used as money ever since. It's scarce. all that kind of things. But the part that I found was interesting on a geopolitical standpoint is if you look at the countries that have been exporting and importing the most, or there'll be the largest decreases in gold reserves from 2021 to 2024. And they decreased their gold reserves for different reasons. Sometimes just to stabilize their own currency, other times because they're a big gold producer and they want to diversify. Sometimes it's to de-dollarize, like with China. But the list of countries that have gotten rid of the most gold in the last 4 years, you got Kazakhstan, Mozambique, so 2 poor countries, United Arab Emirates, that basically does it to leverage their oil wealth elsewhere and diversify, Belarus, because of the sanctions, the Philippines, which gets interesting. Then you got Mongolia, Sri Lanka, Argentina, Cambodia, and Kyrgyzstan. So what do you know?
And those are countries that over the past few years have increased their gold, or
those are the biggest decreases.
Biggest decreases. Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
So about that 200 to 20,000 metric tons of gold that have ever been mined brings up a great story of Operation Golden Lily. Have you covered that on the show?
Yeah, we have actually. I think it happened to be right after you and I had a pretty lengthy discussion about it. But why don't you explain in your words to everyone what Operation Golden Lily is and the significance of it, or what it was?
So from 1930 to 1945, the Japanese were going all across Asia and basically confiscating all the precious metals, jewelry, etc. They were basically raping the wealth of Asia. Asia is a very old civilization. There was a lot to rape. So when I talk about that 200,000 tons, I get a little skeptical that we have accurate records. So they had all this stuff. The United States wins the Battle of Midway, and it becomes crystal clear that the Japanese are not going to win World War II, at least not the Pacific Battle. So one of their generals starts moving all of their gold, trying to bring it back to the homeland. They realized they weren't going to be able to do so safely because the U.S. Navy was taking out their transport ships. So they started burying them in pits in the Philippines. And well, without going into too much detail, a couple of Americans under MacArthur tortured one of the Japanese drivers, a lieutenant, what have you, depending on how the story goes, and got the location of a bunch of these stores of gold. And there's like 175 caches of gold that were buried like 75 feet deep. Now, here's where the story gets a little bit vague. There's about 3 different versions of it, but the general picture is that MacArthur flies all the way back to D.C. to meet with Truman and 3 people that are the head of his war board. One of them was Henry Stimson, Skull and Bones alumni. Another one was, of course, a guy by the name of Anderson, and they created something called the Anderson Trust. And I'm drawing a blank on the third guy, but I'll get his name in a second. Basically, the U.S. was going to take all this gold, and they've used it for decades, ostensibly to fund all kinds of subterfuge, overthrowing other governments all around the world, basically our whole clandestine branches. Now you've got the intelligence basically gets to operate outside of congressional oversight because they don't require their funding from outside. And the amount of money that's there varies. This has been called many things, the Anderson Trust, the 5-Star Trust. In fact, Ian Carroll did a great breakdown of the 5-Star Trust version of the story. That's worth checking out. There's a few other names for it, but the bottom line is that the gold is totally unaccounted for. There's tie-ins to Marcos in the Philippines and how he had some kind of $1 trillion worth of gold. Well, we just talked about how much the total world gold storage is, and this would seem to be an amount very similar. So we don't know how much gold there is. We don't know how much more gold there would be. One of the things that our CIA did during that time period is they were using their excess of gold to keep the price of gold down around the world. They were suppressing the price. And of course, at the time, up until 71, the United States dollar was backed by gold. Well, that stopped. France says, oh, well, you said your dollars are exchangeable for gold. Well, we'll just take the gold. And about 10 minutes later, Nixon took us off the gold standard. And that's why people are going, is the gold really there in Fort Knox? Because, France was asking for an awful lot of it. We just wouldn't do it.
And that was Charles de Gaulle, right? Asking for the gold back. He was asking for their gold. And basically that started a bank run on the gold. And that was the concern, is that everyone was going to come asking for the gold. And so that's why Nixon took us off. That's why they say Nixon took us off the gold standard.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on in that 1971 period, and it all matters. We can go pretty deep on it. I didn't prepare all of that stuff, but I've got the notes still. Another issue with gold is what's called rehypothecation. This is happening. You've got the bullion banks, which are top European banks and top U.S. banks. They're basically trade bullion, sort of like a reserve bank. They have an awful lot of power. They're the ones who get caught suppressing prices. We've seen that in the silver markets ad nauseum. And some people, J.P. Morgan's gotten caught red-handed doing it. There was a trader they known as the Whale, and he lost billions of dollars trading silver. But the problem is rehypothecation. If you're storing, say you've got $1 billion worth of gold in your vaults, well, you're not making a ton of money on it. But what's happened throughout history is you're smart and you realize not everyone's going to come and take out that gold at the same time. So you lend based on that gold, but not just once, sometimes twice or three times. So maybe three people have claim to the same bars of gold. And that's the issue, is the rehypothecation. How many claims are there on the gold, which is why it needs to be audited.
So when you say rehypothecation, in layman's terms, is that like issuing a gold certificate?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just go back into the Middle Ages when
it's like selling a piece of paper saying, "Hey, I have your gold bar, but this piece of paper is a safer way for you to maintain a record. But don't worry, when you come ask for your gold bar, it's in my vault. You just gotta come ask for it." But potentially, a nefarious actor could take that same gold bar, print multiple certificates, and sell it many times to different people.
Well, in fact, that's actually legal, and it's what happens all the time. I mean, you look at the U.S. banking system. We have reserve requirement of 10% of your deposits you have to keep in reserves. Well, you lend out the other 90, but it gets worse. So you've got so you start with $1,000 of deposits, and you lend out $900. Well, the people who borrow the $900 that are going to pay you interest then turn around and they get a deposit back into your bank, and you can lend out 90% of that. So now you give out an $810 loan, and it's this whole Ponzi. It's not necessarily a Ponzi, but that's where the reserve requirements are. They've calculated in America that at any given time, only 10% reserves have to be kept. In Europe, that's only 3% in most countries. So it's a very vulnerable system that if anybody loses confidence, the whole thing can blow up. We almost saw that in 2008 and 2009. That was with the subprime mortgage crisis. I think I found what I was looking for. Anyway, in 2008, 2009, there was about $20 trillion, $20 to $24 trillion of subprime mortgage, so that they were a default. And you can go to the Bank of International Settlements website, BIS.org, and you get all these charts, and they'll tell you all these derivatives. These are basically banks buying and selling, hedging on everything from interest rates to currency swaps to precious metals. They say, well, it's not that big. There may be $500 trillion outstanding, but it's not the net risk. I mean, that's the gross amount. It's all netted off each other. Gordon loses the bet. I make more money on the bet. It nets out.
And derivatives, for those listening, are basically bets on the value of these commodities in the future.
They can be used for bets. They can be used for hedging. For example, you saw the banks last year, the mid-sized banks got hurt really bad. They have a bond portfolio that have to mark to market, meaning when interest rates rose over the last 2 years, the value of their bonds on their books went down, and therefore their balance sheet was weaker. And that's why we lost some banks like Silverado, et cetera. These are bad situations, but to tell you how big this is, the 2008 financial crisis, there was about $25 trillion of derivatives at risk, and that almost took out the entire global financial system. We can go to BIS.org right now, and I will do it if you'd like me to, but you go to interest rate swaps, it's over $800 trillion are at risk. So if the interest rates were ever to go wildly one direction or the other, it just becomes, it's a whole counterparty risk. All of a sudden, your balance sheet's weaker, so I've got to charge you more to lend to you overnight. And then we got a ring of, say, 10 banks, and 3 of them have weaker balance sheets. We all start charging them more. They can't pay that, which weakens. They're going to default on some of their overnight stuff, which means my balance sheet's going to get worse, and the whole thing goes down very, very rapidly. That's the fear.
There's 32. There's 32 times the risk in derivatives that are outstanding derivatives than there were in 2008.
It's even bigger than that. And that was just interest rate swaps alone. You start looking at the interest rate. Okay, I'm filling about a minute of dead air, and I'm going to find you something huge on the gold. This one will blow you away.
Yeah, sure. Well, while you're doing that, I will just go ahead and I'll play this. Our second ad is My Pillow. So let's do that, and that'll give you a second to get your bearings.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. Queen size only $59.98. Kings only $69.98. They sell out fast every year, so order now. Save 20% on our brand new My Crosses. They're designed in the likeness of the one I've worn every day for over 20 years. They come in men's and women's, and they're made right here in the USA. Get our 2025 six-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. Our initial quantities are extremely low, so get them now before they go. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, just $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our first ever mega sale. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Well, that ship is sailed, because right now, every order ships absolutely free.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you to My Pillow. And if y'all would please hit the thumbs up if you're enjoying this conversation. And Brady, back to you.
All right. You were asking me about how much is at risk in total derivatives. Well, here's how much we have at risk with just gold. All right, this is BIS.org's data portal. Right here, these are global gold gross for options bought total of all currencies for all counterparties. So this is all gold derivatives outstanding right now. And if I pull it up, this number right here, it says 135,255,764 millions. So we're talking about $135 trillion that we have just in gold prices. And you can see how much that's fluctuated just in the last decade. This was the financial crisis. Everybody was going to gold. They were trading back and forth. This is when the whole system almost collapsed. It was 3 times more outstanding. But it's not just gold. They have the same things on silver, copper, you name it, all precious metals. Not quite as big. Gold's obviously one of the most traded. But then you start getting interest rate swaps. So if I switch to, this is the CME group predicting where our interest rates are going. This is the next meeting on March, which is next month. About a 97.5% rates are going to stay the same. And people are betting on based on this. You can see there's a better chance a month from now in May at the next meeting, there's a 20% chance of another fall in rates. And the market prices this in, but they have to get it right, because you start taking losses on these huge derivative bets, it really does impact the balance sheet. You start looking at doing this on a global scale, and you understand why 2008, 2009, they were warning us. God, who was the CEO of Goldman Sachs back then who warned us? Henry Paulson warned us we'd have tanks in the streets if we don't bail out the banks. And so that's what we've been doing. And it wasn't just the American banks. That congressional bailout was to about 9 or 10 European banks, and we are still letting them basically borrow for free at the Fed discount window to this day. That's how fragile the thing is.
Wow.
The other thing I think is really important to notice is money supply. So our dollar is backed by what right now?
Nothing.
Backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government and our ability to, at a point of a gun, demand people pay us.
Yeah, pretty much. Our power projection, right?
Exactly. So what you have here is the St. Louis Federal Reserve. Did I get that?
Yep, there you go.
And this is how much money we've printed. We had under $4 trillion of money. And so this is M2 money supply. It's one of the broadest measures. It's a pretty accurate one. We had about, let's see, $3.25 trillion of currency in circulation of the US dollar. And of course, we get all the way through the dot-coms, and it's gone up by about 60%. Then you get Bush in there, keeping the rates artificially low for a ridiculous amount of time. The government spending willy-nilly. This is all the debt money that's being borrowed into circulation by the Federal Reserve. We get up here to 2020, that number is already up to 15 trillion. You get the COVID years, it spikes up again, but it kept going up during Biden. Took a dip and came back in. That's still rising right now. These are all dollars that are in circulation in the world. We export a lot of our inflation. Simply because we are the reserve currency. People have to borrow our dollars, or more importantly, our bonds, so they can trade with us. For now, we are the reserve currency still. That money will come back home to roost. The inflation genie is not back in the bottle. That's a 700 or 800% increase in a 20-year period. Here's the M1 money supply that shows it even more dramatically. Everything's going hunky-dory, and all of a sudden we go from 4 trillion to 21 trillion. So 550% increase in less than a year. That's just new money in circulation. What's the cause of inflation?
Printing too much money.
And more money chasing the same amount of goods is going to drive up prices. That's why we're talking about gold so much these days, because people are worried about it. Gold has historically been a wonderful way to protect yourself against inflation. So that's I guess I may as well show this. Hang on. Talking about interest rates. Sure would be nice if we could actually know how much inflation we actually have. I'll give you a few samples here. There's another great website that shows alternative economic data. This is called Shadow Stats. And basically this right here is the money supply chart. This is the way they used to calculate money supply. It shows you there's a whole lot more, but it's interesting because they changed the way they do this stuff. Unemployment. Oops. There we go. The way stopped changing how unemployment was measured. They redefined people out of the workforce. But if we did inflation the way we did back in the 80s, if we calculated, it would be sitting up here. Unemployment would be sitting at 25%. Not down here under 5%. So our employment isn't healthier than it was 30 years ago. It's just been redefined how we calculate it. And of course, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has become politicized, and whatever they come out with, they revise downwards 6 or 9 months later. Somehow the markets are not getting ticked off about it. You have professional traders that rely on this data to be accurate, and apparently they're letting them get away with it. It's another fun one. We go to inflation. Actual inflation rate, had we do it the same way it was done back in 1990, we'd be looking at about 8% inflation right now, and it climbed as high as 15% under Biden. So is the inflation genie out of the bottle, back in the bottle? I think you make a pretty good argument that it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think people can feel it at the store, right?
Yeah, and here's another fun one. This is the employment population chart. Okay, this goes back to 1950. This is basically real simple formula. How many people are employable in the United States? Can you pull it up?
Oh, yes,
This is how many people are employed in the United States versus how many people are eligible. It's a real simple formula. Back in the 50s and 60s, this number hovered around 55, 57%. It started climbing in the 1970s, despite some bad economic pressure. Do you know why that happened?
Why is that?
Women fully integrated into the workforce. So we have rising inflation and almost got to the point where you needed a 2-income household in many places. But that's what's going on.
So women fully integrating into the workforce caused inflation?
No, this is the employment population ratio.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were looking at an inflation chart. So, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
The inflation of the 70s was caused by going off the gold standard.
There you go.
some other bad decisions. At the same time, we've got the whole women's lib movement, and that matters. That was artificial thrust upon us by social forces we can get into anytime you like, because I know you're very aware that that happened. After Y2K hits, this number starts going down. The employment population ratio. This is the Obama years. And it claimed that did a little bit okay during the Trump years, starts going back up. Then, of course, COVID hits. We have yet to recover to pre-COVID Trump numbers in the employment population ratio, which means a lot of these people are on welfare or otherwise not making any money contributing to the economy. This is not a healthy picture. And again, that's why we talk about gold. Now, I have always said, and I love your thoughts on this. I know we haven't talked a whole lot about crypto. And I'm pretty sure we agree that a global digital, the CBDC, central bank digital currency, is the last thing we want because that allows, the great reset scenario.
Correct.
That being said, our current monetary system will not last forever. Something's got to give. I think the solution, my solution to be perfect, would be a decentralized crypto with a physical component based on a basket of commodities, including gold, silver, other useful minerals, absolutely real estate. Not necessarily some other things people would want to put in there. And I think that segues us into sovereign wealth fund.
Okay. Well, so before we get to sovereign wealth fund, what about Fort Knox? So the fort, I understand. I think you've made the case for the gold and why gold at this point is all eyes are on it. But the narrative out there is that all this gold is moving out of London, basically, and moving potentially to America. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I brought that article with us just to take a look at because it is making the rounds again. This just came out a little bit ago. Our friend Colonel Tanner Watkins sent out the tweet. Ash in America, a good friend here at Badlands Media, was on this tweet. Apparently, why are U.S. banks flying gold from London to New York? About 8,000 gold bars have been moved out of the Bank of England's vault in recent months. We've seen that exact same story about 3 times in the last decade. I see no evidence that it's accurate, but I understand the narrative behind it. Does London have enough gold to be doing that? No. But you also have heard the stories going back years that we took our gold back from the Vatican Bank. And it's one of my favorite ones to debunk. Everyone talks about, the bankrupt corporation of the United States from 1871 because we borrowed all the money from the Vatican Bank and the European banks for the Civil War. Well, the Vatican Bank didn't exist until 1944, so that probably didn't happen in the 1800s. A lot of other stuff happened with the Vatican Bank in World War II, but that's not what this is all about. I don't know that this is or isn't true. I just take this story with a bit of skepticism because I've seen the exact same narrative float past my screen a few times. Okay.
And so what do you think the intent would be in deploying there? Let's just assume it's not true. What would be the intention of floating the narrative out there? Is it to manipulate markets? Is it to provide false confidence?
My best guess is it's clickbait.
Okay.
That's really my best guess on that. It's important that all the different players in the financial system have gold reserves of their own because they're trading this stuff back and forth all the time on, big imports and exports. And, sometimes I don't want your peso or your ruble. I want to have gold instead. You can't just have all the gold in one place. It shuts down the system. Mm-hmm. So it really makes no sense. And, London has been the depository for the bullion banks for a very long time. The city of London is the center of the gold trading universe. So why would America have that many demands? I don't know. That's a story that I'm open to being true. I understand what they're talking about. I just think it's more likely that it's not.
Interesting. And the relationship between the London banks, the Federal Reserve, and gold, how do you think that ties into this?
Well, that goes all the way back to the creation of the Federal Reserve. So they got the Bank of England, right, which is different than the City of London. But a lot of the major players in the City of London, which is just a 1 mile square piece of real estate, has totally separate rules from the rest of England. It's not what a lot of people think it is, but it is a very unique place in the world. It's got its own rules, own mayor, and everything like that. That's where a lot of the European banks, some of them tied to the Rothschilds and other banking families, Well, some of those banks still they're still stock owners in the U.S. Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, of course, is not a federal. It doesn't have reserves. They call it the Federal Reserve banking system. So it's not federal. It has no reserves. There is no banking and there is no system. It is a bunch of private banks that have got a monopolized position to basically issue the debt to the U.S. government. And they get paid interest on it. It's good business if you can have it. I've been talking about it quite a bit on my series on secret societies because the people behind Jekyll Island and everything like that have the same kind of connections. You got the Warburg families, the Schiff families, and the Rothschild families from the Jewish banking side of the world. But you also had the Puritan banks of the J.P. Morgans, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers. They were all there in Jekyll Island, working together. So when I hear the Jewish banks around the world, I'm well, no, they sit at the table without a doubt, but there's a lot of other players there. The London bullion banks are some of those players. J.P. Morgan is certainly one of the biggest players there. So there's cross-Atlantic. It's this whole Anglo-American rules-based order that we put together in Bretton Woods in 1944. And just for the record, I'm sitting about 30 minutes from Bretton Woods right now. So I want to go tour the place. Apparently it's not that exciting, but they just basically carved up the whole world in a financial system the same way that like the Dulles brothers and everyone in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 carved up all the oil. Well, they did Bretton Woods
in the Middle East. Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, fair enough. Yeah. Let's shift the conversation then to the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So actually there's a Trump's first cabinet meeting is happening right now. So I'll be interested to hear what comes out of that. It's being like live stream. They're all sitting at the table, I think, live streaming the conversation.
Who's missing from the cabinet? Is there anyone else that we need to have confirmed that we're missing?
Well, let's see. I know there are a few that are still out there that I think that are like still going through the process, but I think all the big ones are done. I know like the transportation secretary was having his hearing the other day. Linda McMahon, I think, got confirmed the other day. So yeah, there might be a few out there, but I think all the really important ones are done as far as I can recall. So, but there's definitely still some like process bureaucracy that they're going through.
Are you as surprised as I am that he actually was able to get all of them through with so little?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting point, and it kind of leans into my theory that the people he selected this time, like some of us call them like the television characters, because he picked people who were very, very well known, like entities, versus last time he kind of picked people that were, some of the names were a little more obscure, especially towards the end of his first term. Christopher Miller, the Secretary of Defense, it's like nobody had heard of him before. So the fact that he gone with Marco Rubio as a Secretary of State, right? Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense. These are Kristi Noem as DHS. These are names that everyone recognizes, and so I think that played into it. And I also think that you're right that's worth thinking about. He didn't have to fight the Congress to get these people in as hard. I mean, some of them cash, yes, but in RFK, of course. But I think for the most part, Congress was willing to let these people through with just minimal amounts of grilling, so to speak, in their confirmation hearings. That may have been by design, so he didn't have to spend 6 months trying to get his cabinet together.
Well, you bring up a really good point. The Senate confirmations, we could only afford, Republicans could only have 4 defectors. They got 53 seats. If we get down to 50, J.D. Vance cast a tie-breaking, but we didn't get 4 defectors on any of these people. And we always talk about how Donald Trump is transactional in nature. So I'm wondering, did he make some kinds of deals to ensure that he got his cabinet through? And what were those deals? Will we ever find out?
Yeah. Because like Mitch McConnell defected. He defected on RFK. He defected on cash. So he defected on a few of them. But you're right. We didn't get the 4 defectors that would have forced him to do a recess appointment. So I think you're right. I think he probably used this as leverage to negotiate a deal, and he can of course he can replace any of these people at any given time if they aren't doing what he needs them to do. But I will say I said yesterday, I'm pleasantly surprised. I would say surprised. I'll just say I'm happy with what I'm seeing from Marco Rubio. He was the one that I had probably the most trepidation about just because of his, his history.
He sat on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, who issued the bogus report on Russiagate, and he's never said a word about it.
Exactly.
He also got confirmed 98-0, which to me is the biggest red flag of all time.
Yes. Yep. He got a unanimous confirmation that one person defected, and then of course he didn't vote because he's in the Senate. So yes, 98. Like one person wasn't there, I guess. But yeah, unanimous confirmation. So, but again, it's like there wasn't even like clips from his confirmation hearing. His confirmation hearing was that smooth. And the second he got confirmed, like he didn't get grilled at all. And as soon as he got confirmed, he was on the phone, getting out of a chair on the phone, called Netanyahu, got on a plane, flew to Germany, I think, and then started taking meetings. So Trump put him to work the second he got confirmed, and there was no delay. And I think that's by design. And he's been doing a great job. I mean, the stuff that I'm hearing him say, he's adopting the positions that I would want to hear our chief diplomat adopt. I mean, he's very, very, he's an ardent Zionist, so that concerns me a little bit, but that hasn't become an issue yet. So I'm happy with what I'm seeing so far.
I completely agree with that. The one thing I knew about him is he's always been a China hawk. Mm-hmm. And there's different theories on, what's going on with the global alliance, et cetera. Whether a China hawk's what we need. In some ways, when it comes to trade, we most certainly do. We've been getting our butts kicked, and that's got to stop. China's got way too much control of the resources we need in our industries. So, yeah, if we end up 4 years from now still being happy with Rubio, that will have been a very, very good sign.
Yeah, exactly. So Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Commerce, has been he made some really interesting interesting comments the day that Trump signed the executive order for the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So basically what he made it sound like, his exact words actually were, the United States government does more business than any other organization in the world. And we do business with very, very large entities like Pfizer, for example. We bought 2 billion vaccine doses from Pfizer. And if we're going to do that volume of business, we're basically investing in Pfizer. We should have ownership stake, meaning the American people should have ownership stake, or should get something more of a value add than simply just, we're purchasing these vaccines and we're going to deploy them wherever they need to be deployed. And so his argument in that moment was basically, we're going to leverage these negotiations and do business in that way where that value add is going to become part of this sovereign wealth fund that Trump was talking about. So let's start with, before we get to what the sovereign wealth fund actually is, let's start with the constitutionality of it. So the general concept is that it's a portfolio, it's an investment portfolio, probably similar to how like an endowment fund for a college or a university, like every college and university has an endowment fund. They take donations from donors. They put the donations into an investment fund, that's spread out across the markets in various ways. And then that fund spits out a dividend, and that dividend provides a cash flow for operations for the college and university. And that becomes their baseline for what they're doing. Right. So similar, I think, concept to how that's going to work. And then you can add to it every year as you're accruing more donations, or, the income, your revenue stream is giving you more income. So let's talk about the constitutionality, because you and I talked about this a little bit the other day, and it's a great conversation. I know, and you're going to play devil's advocate here. I'll kick it to you, and to start, what's your take on the constitutionality of a sovereign wealth fund? Go.
Yeah, it's a great question. My friend Douglas V. Gibbs, Mr. Constitution. Mm-hmm. He and I just did a series of 4 different episodes looking at all of Trump's executive orders and asking the question, is this constitutional? Does this actually fall under the purview of the executive branch, or did he overstep his bounds? And that was 4-hour-plus long episodes. And of all the executive orders that we went through, there's only one that we question the constitutionality of, and that's the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So my answer is that no, it is not. That there's no place in the Constitution that allows the federal government to have any place whatsoever in our private markets, period. I mean, that's That's a black and white answer. It just doesn't exist. Now, could Congress create a sovereign wealth fund? Yeah, it is under their purview, but they didn't. He did this with his executive order.
Interesting.
From a constitutional standpoint, he's out of his lane, and maybe Congress will bail him out of that. But I don't think this one flies.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess my question would be: was the Federal Reserve constitutional? Was creating the Federal Reserve constitutional?
No, it was not, because the power to mint coin is a vested power in Congress, and a vested means you can't give it away. You can't delegate it to somebody else, and they did. They gave it to private enterprise.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is not. It should never have been allowed.
Interesting. So then you talk about the IRS and the income tax. Is the income tax constitutional? So we've fallen into a system, and you and I have had this conversation so many times over the past 5 years. So many forms of taxation that have been foisted upon us, where basically like half of our income is taxed at the end of the day, because not only are you paying income tax, you're paying property tax. Every time you go to the store, you're paying tax. I mean, everything that you do, financially speaking, is taxed, and you're taxed up to your eyeballs. And so the system that we're currently under, they're extracting the wealth from the citizenry, and then they're using that wealth to enrich themselves, them being the oligarchs, right?
Well, okay, that's the important point about the oligarchs. And this is one of the reasons, not only is a sovereign wealth fund something we can't do constitutionally, it's something we shouldn't do. We fought a bloody revolution to get away from the mercantilist system of the British. What's a mercantilist system? Well, that's where the people closest to the government put their people in charge of the government, so the government will now go out there and fund things. And these are two big terms I always come up with. And one is internal improvements, with air quotes, and the other one is protective tariffs. So what you see with the protective tariffs is you can find the government are now going to tax unfavored companies, and for the benefit protecting favored companies. That's the mercantilist system. That's why we had the tea tax and everything like that from the British East India Company. That's what we were fighting against. The founding fathers, they say, this is ridiculous. You are creating an unlevel playing field and putting your finger on the scales of commerce. That was one of the main causes of a Revolutionary War. When they talk about internal improvements, back in the Revolutionary days, those were like canals. We had to build canals for all this, shipping. Well, who got the contracts to build the canals? Well, these are the people who eventually would become the robber barons. Same thing in the Civil War. It was an economic war was fought, because the North wanted to throw protective tariffs on everything like that. So the South would have to, basically their exports weren't worth as much money, but they also wanted to do their internal improvements, and they needed that tax money from the South. And what did those tariffs go to? They went to building railroads and steel and everything like that. And after 40 years of single party Republican rule, what emerged in the Gilded Age was the biggest disparity of wealth in the history of mankind. These people are the robber barons whose families have hidden all of their wealth behind quote unquote tax-free foundations, which they invented in 1910 and 1911. 2 years, it was the Carnegies and Rockefellers. And that happened exactly 2 years before they threw the income tax on the rest of us, so that the government can keep giving their favored industries while their money grows, generational wealth grows on a tax-free basis. That's what happens when you start getting into mercantilism. Okay.
Yeah. It's like those are all salient points, all good points, and certainly something that we need to be aware of. And for all the rah-rah and the cheerleading that we do for Trump and the people around him that we have identified as good faith actors, the Kash Patels, the General Flynn's, that's not going to last forever. I mean, there's going to come a day when all of them have aged out, so to speak, of government service, some sooner than others. And who knows who replaces them? There's no guarantee that the people who come in behind them are going to be virtuous, trustworthy people. I mean, we hope they are, but that's going to require vigilance on our side. It's also going to require cultivating a more moral society, because we live in a very immoral society right now with a very degenerate culture. So,
I owe to say that, the person who I'm sitting in for, Matt Ehret, and Matt and I agree on a lot of things, but he's written a couple books that talked about this, the American system, which is a version, but it was successful. I mean, the American industry, we became the richest nation in history. So did this system work as a whole nation? Well, yeah, Are we bloody rich? And that's the discussion Matt and I have had back and forth for a couple of years. It's our disagreement. You just made the point that eventually, the good actors may not be in power, and someone else now has the ability to put their fingers on the scales. And that was what the founding fathers wanted to avoid. Now, the issue with having that discussion or debate, whatever you want to call it, is Matt's got 240 years of real life experience to draw from, and everything I'm saying is purely theoretical because we never got the free market system in place. It didn't last more than a year. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking hypotheticals, and he makes a great argument. So I'm not saying he's wrong, but I'm pointing out eventually you get bad actors in charge of the government, and they are going to do the grift and graft.
Yeah, and they could potentially weaponize a sovereign wealth fund, to your point, into a mercantilist system where they're just issuing these contracts to their friends, and it becomes a much easier vehicle to create that robber baron system, reintroduce it.
So here's my question for you, if you want to pull that up on screen. This is the U.S. debt clock. Does that look like the wealthiest nation in history?
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
That's $36 trillion of national debt. Now, give that being said, do we actually have any sovereign wealth to invest? Or shouldn't we be paying down our debts first so that we don't in debt our following generations? Where is that money going to come from? Where's the wealth? Yeah.
Well, detangling that situation is its own conversation, its own debate, because that is, we talk about hypotheticals. That is a hypothetical that is pure speculation. And it's something you would imagine that Trump has thought about and talked about and worked through, and hopefully has a plan that we don't know about yet. But that's a very, very, very important point. I can't help but wonder if, just hypothetically speaking, if we take the constitutional question here and kind of set it aside, and maybe for now just settle on the idea that maybe the sovereign wealth fund isn't a forever solution. Maybe the tariff situation isn't a forever solution. How do you transition out of a system where you're extracting wealth from the citizenry, and basically your government is a parasite that is sucking the life force out of your population and killing it basically over time? How do you get out of that and get back into a system that we had in the 1890s, where you have blue ribbon committees because you have too much money and you don't know what to do with it? And then you can fund canals, you can fund, the Hoover Dam, you can fund Mount Rushmore, you can fund these massive projects that require that level of funding without having to borrow money and go into debt. I wonder if the tariffs have, obviously Trump talks about that and Matt's talked about that. And that's a very, probably like one of the strongest verticals, so to speak, of a revenue stream. The idea of seizing the assets of people who have violated these executive orders that Trump has, that Trump has alluded to. Executive Order 13818, John has said this, does not empower Trump or anybody to seize anybody's assets. All it does is it empowers them to freeze the assets of people who've been involved in human trafficking and child trafficking. That's what that executive order does. It then requires prosecution and due process from a court, and the court then would strip those assets from those people. And we've seen that happen to Dan Gertler in British court with his mineral rights in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this other idea, which I think they're probably talking about, I would suspect in this cabinet meeting today, is these mineral rights. So we've spent the past year on Badlands Daily talking about the mineral rights, talking about how Executive Order 13818 froze the mineral rights, or froze the assets of Dan Gertler, which effectively froze the mineral rights for the Israeli diamond cartel, with Gertler being the scion to the diamond cartel. And the mineral rights, the monopoly that he had in the DRC, is estimated value right now, just that one country, is $24 trillion, in excess of $24 trillion. So you're talking about a massive amount of money, which is why right now you have terrorist groups, proxy groups from Rwanda coming in from the east and seizing territory where those processing plants are, where those mines are. And that is why the president of the DRC has reached out and said publicly that he would like to offer Donald Trump some of these mineral rights in exchange for assistance in dealing with these people, not in the form of a military assistance, but I think he's asking for Trump to come in and negotiate a deal. That's the way I'm reading it.
Negotiated with, of course, with a carrot and a stick in hand.
Yeah, of course.
With the might of the U.S. behind it.
Yeah, carrot and a stick for sure. Because Rwanda, the president of Rwanda, was installed in the 90s. He's a globalist hegemony uniparty puppet, basically, Paul Kagame, and very much tied to the World Economic Forum, Zionist Tel Aviv cartel. That all those circles he's deeply tied to. So I think it's a pretty good play, in my opinion, by the Congolese president, to do that, because he understands that Trump is going to have leverage over those people, over Kagame rather, through those people.
Well, let me ask you the question, because I don't think we have the answer to what this looks like in Congo or Ukraine, Leof, because they're both similar topics. Depending on how they're going to give the U.S. some of your resources, but what does that mean? Is that going to, if we have a corrupt government, it's basically going to mean the U.S. government's going to give cheap deals to all its favorite cronies.
Yep.
But what I could see happening is having these strategic resources, because we're talking about a lot of them, they're very strategic, and having the U.S. hold a reserve of those that they're then able to auction at market price if they maintain a certain level. That might pass the constitutional test, and it might be a little bit less subject to corruption. But I bring up a really good example of this. I spent most of my adult life in San Diego. And if you're a public employee in California, you either have your retirement tied up with CalPERS or CalSTRS. And these are investment funds that are supposed to invest your retirement. Now, the problem is that the money managers that are put in that position are political appointees. And that means, Gavin Newsom gets to say who manages your money. And, Gavin Newsom is going to say, okay, go ahead and only invest in green companies. And then you get stuff like Solyndra. And now you've got people that are putting politics and the fiduciary responsibility to get the best return possible. There's a mix. And of course, these asset managers who pay tons of money to get this position, because they're charging, banking 1% fee on billions of dollars of money, retirements. It's a good job to have. They then turn around and launder the money right back to the politicians with campaign contributions. And now you've got the corrupt circle jerk. So that's what happens anytime you get government involved in the private sector. That's my big issue.
Yeah. So it's a very, very important point to make. That is the circle, the cyclical flow of wealth. That's the problem. I mean, and I'm just speculating here because I'm not a commodities trader, but from a practical standpoint, taking those considerations and setting them aside again alongside the constitutional consideration, the way you would monetize, I would say, those mineral rights, since they're not located in the United States and you wouldn't have direct access to oversee them and supervise them, you basically would do, I would think, a ground lease where, okay, you are given rights to certain metals, certain minerals in certain regions, and you get a map, those are all drawn out. Here are the minerals that are yours. And then you would negotiate with contractors who wanted to mine them, and whoever gave you the best deal, whoever said, all right, I'm willing to invest X number of dollars, millions of dollars to develop the infrastructure to run these mines, which would require mining equipment, the safety standards, hiring all the people, the logistics to get it out, the processing plants, all of it. Whoever gave you the best, most favorable terms, you would then lease the mineral rights to them, meaning that they're going to pay you a certain amount of money per month or per year for X number of years. Maybe it's a 20-year lease, maybe it's a 50-year lease. That would all be based on how much money they're putting in to invest in this infrastructure. And in exchange, they get to they don't own the land, they don't own the minerals, but they like the mineral rights, but they do own the infrastructure, and then the product that is extracted, they would own as well. And then whether you could also negotiate a percentage, like a royalty from the sale of those minerals, that would be part of the deal. So that is how I would see a deal like that being put together. Like, if you're Donald Trump, the deal maker, I would see it evolving that way. But again, that does create the opportunity, to your point, for grift and graft in the future. Because if Donald Trump negotiates the perfect deal and it's fully transparent and everyone's very happy with the way the contracts are awarded and the way the negotiations unfold. And the U.S. taxpayer, the U.S. citizen, rather, not the taxpayer, the U.S. citizen and the United States of America get the best deal possible. And it's a huge net gain. That doesn't prevent anybody 20 years from now from going the next time these ground leases need to be renegotiated from coming in and doing something really nefarious and giving it back to a guy like Dan Gertler, who's going to come in and use child slavery. And then we're right back to where we were before. Right. But except now the U.S. government's directly involved, and that's even worse. So those are all factors that have to be addressed 100%. There's ethical factors. There are practical factors in terms of like, how do you avoid this becoming like a mercantilistic socialist system? There's constitutional factors. Like, is this even constitutional? But yeah, I mean, just the purely from a financial model situation of trying to get us out of a situation of a really, really nefarious, unconstitutional system that we're in right now, where they're extracting wealth from the citizenry and using it not only to fund the government, although they aren't really, but really to enrich themselves. That's where I think I find these conversations really interesting, because it's a creative, outside the box way of thinking, and that's where I think we need to move to if we're going to actually solve this problem and not just keep doing more of the same, right?
So let's go back to the end of the Cold War. We already talked about after World War I how they carved up all the oil fields in the land. We talked about how at Bretton Woods in World War II we carved up, all the banking system and created that whole deal. Well, after the Cold War, they did our multinational corporations, with the help of our diplomats, did the same thing in the former Soviet and Ukrainian territories, and that's what caused all these oligarchs that were basically the Russian underworld to make all their money during the 90s.
Yeah, the aluminum wars is what they called it.
Exactly. Well, part of the reason America has been so invested in the Ukraine war, as you know, is some of U.S. multinational corporations have made huge investments in Ukrainian mining rights and all sorts of things. So when you called me to say we're going to do this show and the topics, I looked up the top multinational corporations that have invested in Ukraine just since 2020. Okay. And think about this. These are companies, these are gigantic multi-billion-dollar corporations, but they are putting their own money in there, expecting them, obviously to turn a profit on it. And they're going to pressure the U.S. government to protect their investment. Well, that's problematic. That's the mercantilist system. But here's the companies. These are all, household names. You have Cargill, who's put $100 million into a grain terminal in 2022. You got Westinghouse has put over $400 million in nuclear reactor fuel reactors from 2022 to 2024. I've got PepsiCo, for whatever reason, decided to build a $100 million snack plant in the Ukraine in 2021. Sure, that's going well. Philip Morris International does a $120 million factory. Philip Morris, of course, is tobacco. I didn't even know that grows there.
Interesting.
Company called Bunge puts in $30 million for an oil complex in 2021. You got Archer Daniels Midland, $50 million processing. A few years before that, you got some other really fun ones. DuPont gets in there for seed production. Monsanto. Where's Citigroup, of course, my former employer, banking and financial services. They want to give the loans to rebuild Ukraine. So we already have that multinational scheming set up in Ukraine, all set to take advantage of whatever deal Trump cuts. And they've got every incentive, financial incentive, to basically keep throwing our money towards Zelensky so that their investments are protected. Now, if we can avoid that in the Congo, which I think we can, as you just described, we do it in an ethical manner, then it makes a lot of sense. But it's going to be more tricky in Russia and the Ukraine, without a doubt.
Yeah. And I think it's important to, I look at those two as two very, very different situations. And obviously I haven't done the in-depth study on both, like the way that somebody who was directly involved in the deal might study it meticulously. But I do understand some of the geopolitical and political realities of those two areas. By the way, I just looked it up. It says there were 1,580 tons of tobacco produced in Ukraine in 2022 on 700 hectares of quality agricultural land that has been used to grow food. Interesting. So I guess they figured out a way to get tobacco to grow in Ukraine. I don't think it grew there naturally, though.
Well, they do have some pretty red fields. I mean, for grain and everything like that. So it may make sense. I mean, I'm certainly not a whateverologist that knows much about planting, but
Yeah. Yeah. But to your point, it does sound like they were using old grain fields to grow the tobacco. Yeah. So the big difference here is that, and I have done a little bit of research into the Ukraine mineral situation. As of right now, there really isn't a rare earth mineral industry in Ukraine, and the biggest reason now why isn't there? That's a big question. The surveys that we have that suggest that there are these minerals in eastern Ukraine, the regions primarily that Russia has annexed, those come from the Soviet era, 70s and 80s. And there's a lot of people who say, well, it's Soviet surveys. Like there's no way you can trust it. I kind of tend to disagree, even though the Soviet people lived a pretty austere life. I think the KGB and the higher levels of their government proved to be pretty formidable. And if they wanted to do a legitimate survey to figure out where they had rare earth minerals, I suspect that they probably had the capability to do that to some degree of accuracy. It may not be perfect, but it's probably more reliable than not. Now, the question is, why hasn't that, since the Cold War ended, why hasn't that developed? You're talking about potentially tens of trillions of dollars of certainly hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth, and a huge potential return on your investment. I wrote this in the brief the other day. I tend to think that if the level of criminality that exists in Ukraine that we think and suspect is there, such as the child trafficking, the human trafficking, which we know about the human trafficking, that's been pretty well demonstrated. The organ trafficking, that industry has been certainly exists in Turkey. There have been a lot of those rings have been arrested in the past few years. The Black Sea in general has been a pretty high, as I understand it, it's a pretty high traffic area for the organ trafficking market. Turkey has apparently a pretty sophisticated healthcare system. It's a very popular place, my wife tells me, for people to go to get selective surgeries. So, I wonder if the decision not to cultivate this industry was intentional, because you would imagine if you're spending billions, tens of billions of dollars to build out this industry, to build out the necessary infrastructure that I listed earlier, the mining equipment, the people, the processing plants, you're going to be bringing a lot of people and eyeballs to eastern Ukraine. And maybe there are people there who the oligarchs there don't want that. They don't want that level of attention. Plus, a lot of this is speculative. Like you have these survey maps that suggest these minerals are there, but you could spend billions of dollars and get a site that's empty. Mine a mountain that has nothing in it, or mine a mine. I don't think there's really many mountains in Ukraine, but you could do a mine that doesn't yield anything. So there's the speculative nature of it. The uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty in Ukraine with the mineral rights thing, which might be part of the reason Putin is willing to use that as a negotiating chip, a bargaining chip. The DRC is a proven product. Like we know that the minerals are in the DRC. There are hundreds of mines. We were looking at them on Badlands Daily yesterday in real time. The artisanal mines that are all mapped out on certain interactive websites. So those mineral rights being offered is a much more, plus the infrastructure there to a certain extent already exists. I mean, it needs to be fortified and it needs to be cleaned up, but it's already there. So those mineral rights to me are far more attractive. If I'm President Trump, like I'm looking at that offer as a far more attractive offer than the Ukraine one. I would be looking at the Ukraine mineral deal as more of an opportunity to build relationships with Russia and do a joint venture with the Russian government where, we're more of a silent partner and we allow the Russian government to kind of take the lead on that situation. But I think that would be more about diplomacy and geopolitics than it would be about actually building out part of that sovereign wealth fund, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the other interesting part, we've looked at 1,000 Ukrainian maps, and I've speculated for quite some time that Russia could very easily take out Odessa and leave Ukraine as a landlocked backwater nothing. I would imagine that the U.S. corporations are going to try very hard to keep that from happening because they would like easy access to the Black Sea, I would think. But depends on how this whole peace thing goes. Yeah, there really is no reason for Russia to remain aggressive after their stated purposes of this military operation are and they're right there. They're going to get what they want, I think, and the Donbass is going to be part of Russia. It'll be annexed. As I think, we know we don't have to relitigate that history. We've been doing it for too long, but it's fascinating. I brought up something else for you, talking about sovereign wealth. Thought this was interesting. The biggest sovereign wealth funds in the world today are right here. And if you want to pull that up, the biggest at only $1 trillion is Norway. Norway's an incredibly wealthy nation. They've got oil reserves right off their coast, and basically they're able to fund universal health care and free college and everything. That's comes out of their sovereign wealth fund. They have no debt. That's the opposite of what we're looking at with the U.S. debt clock. And someone made a comment in there about the U.S. debt clock not being all that accurate. Yeah, you're probably right. I bet it's a lot higher if you really factor in everything we owe or allegedly owe. If the U.S. debt was double what the national debt clock said, I'm not going to be surprised. You got the China Investment Corp, $941 billion, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, Hong Kong, and Saudi Arabia. Now, these are actually wealthy countries with small population, besides China, small populations. And they can do a sovereign wealth fund. China, of course, is a totalitarian government and who owns all the private industry. So, of course, they can become rich. But the U.S. doesn't have the same kind of structure. So I don't know how you get to this in America. It's a really tough ask.
Yeah. It's also worth noting that the Sama foreign holdings, that's only part of the PIF. The PIF is actually valued closer to 900 trillion, is my understanding, and the Sama is just their foreign assets. So when you talk about Aramco and you talk about the oil, that's actually part of the PIF, and the Sama is only part of their sovereign wealth fund. So their sovereign wealth fund is actually worth really more. They would actually be probably number 3 on that list.
About 900. Well, that's perfect because this list only went to that would be the next one down here, the Aramco, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Well, it's a wealthy country for a reason.
Yep.
They sit on oil reserves, and they've done a good job diplomatically in protecting themselves, and without spending a ton of their own money on defense. Funny how that works.
Yeah. And that was, of course, the crux of the petrodollar deal that Henry Kissinger cut with King Faisal in 1973, where he said, "We will defend you, we will protect you, we the United States will protect you if you sell all of your oil in U.S. dollars," which effectively replaced the gold standard in terms of giving the backing, so to speak, to the U.S. dollar.
Yeah. There's an interesting, I'm trying to remember the name of the video, but someone tells that narrative really well and then ties it also to a lot of the dollar is backed by U.S. real estate, which backs into the conversation, should the federal government own any federal land in the first place, only for necessary buildings, what the Constitution says. And I like to get in heated debates with Teddy Roosevelt fans because, basically he seized a ton of state lands unconstitutionally. There's no provision for the federal government to own that land. But if that's also back, it's part of the whole petrodollar scam, according to one narrative, and I think it may make sense.
All
right, what else do we want to cover today?
Yeah, I mean that was pretty much my list. I mean, are there any questions in the chat? I say we have a good audience here. Does anyone have any questions related to? This is the guy to ask when it comes to the financial elements of this stuff. So. Obviously, we're operating off of limited information because we don't know all of the actuals in terms of these mineral rights deals. We don't know all the actuals in terms of what Trump has planned for the sovereign wealth fund, and we certainly don't know the actuals when it comes to the gold in Fort Knox. But we can speculate all day long.
All right, what's your bet? We'll bet a drink. But how many ounces do you think are actually there? Is it the 8,000 metric tons they say, or is it going to be less or more?
So they say there's 8,000 metric tons, right?
Yep.
My guess is it's going to be less. I mean, I would think that that's a situation where they're going to project more. They're going to overestimate to try to like overvaluate their holdings. But my guess is it's going to be less. Now, how much less? I mean, I don't know. Let's say 7,000. We'll play. What's it called? The Price is Right. 7,000 metric tons.
That's your over under. I'll take the over.
Okay.
Take the over. Funny comment in your chat. Where is it? Someone said, man, this guy's negative talking about me, I think. Man, this dude's negative. He's just ready to give up now. No, actually, I'm really positive. Our government has been hijacked from us for, more than a century. You can go back as far as you want, and they just keep incrementally taking more and more. We are living a period of time that's one of the only times in American history we have a chance to reverse that trend. And it showed up in November at the polls. That was a mandate for a better, leaner, more efficient government. We've got a chance to fix a ton of things right now. We're living through an amazing period of time, and I would not want to live any other time. Now, we got to get it right because the dangers are bigger than they've ever been, and the people that want to take away everything about the Constitution, the globalists, whatever you want to call them, they were pretty close to getting their Great Reset in play, and they haven't been wiped out yet.
Yeah. That's an important point too. Is like the fight isn't over yet. Like backdoor deals aside, like things that we don't necessarily know about aside, the fight certainly isn't over. And of course, as we've talked about at GART many times, there is no defeating evil permanently. Like evil resides in the hearts of men. So as long as there are human beings, there will be evil, there will be nefariousness, there will be bad actors. You're never going to get rid of that. So you have to safeguard whatever you build today. You have to safeguard it against tomorrow. And that was what the founding fathers were trying to do with the Constitution.
I like to say that, everyone talks about right versus left. And I need to do this. The proper way of looking at right versus left is 100% left is 100% government. Yep. That can be fascism, communism, whatever kind of ism you want to do. That's 100% government, which means zero individual liberty, which is 0%. You have 100% individual liberty and no government, also known as anarchy. That doesn't work. So the goal has always been to have as much freedom as possible while still maintaining order, just enough government to create order. We did the Articles of Confederation, and it wasn't enough government to maintain order. So they wrote the Constitution. The Federalists and Anti-Federalists battled it out. The Federalists promised that this new government wouldn't become what it became. They lied. The Anti-Federalists warned that it would have. And the Anti-Federalists were actually the Federalists. The Federalists were actually nationalists, but that's a different debate. So we now have a Constitution. The Constitution that was ratified was pretty close to perfect, but they took the way it was ratified and changed it very quickly. And now we've got a Constitution that's almost 55% government. So when you say someone's on the right, well, the Republican Party's over here at about 60% on the left. Democrats are about 80%. I'm all the way over here at about 15 or 20. That's the proper amount of government where you can still maintain order. And the United States of America does not have to worry about foreign invasion. We are the most well-armed civilian militia in history. We just need a good Navy to protect the trade routes, and that's it. Our foreign diplomacy, I'm all for, staying the heck out of, keep everyone else out of our hemisphere and staying out of other people's business.
Yep. No, I completely agree with that. Yeah. The real spectrum is like you said, government and individual. So in which one do you empower? Do you empower the individual? Do you empower government? And I would make the argument that history has proven that when you empower the individual and you encourage the individual to better themselves, that's what's good for the goose is good for the gander. That is how you build a prosperous society. When you empower the collective, when you empower the government and you ask the individual to sacrifice himself for the sake of the collective, that's when you fall into different forms of feudalism, different forms of socialism, different forms of collectivism, communism. So, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. And look, it's always been known that a republic needs to remain small, which is why the United States of America and the Constitution was not a republic. It is a confederation of republics. That's a huge difference. Republics get too big; they always fall under the same dangers of democracy, where the 2.5% of the population that are psychotics, that they cannot feel empathy. These people are always going to end up in places of power. So you have to limit their ability to wield it. And the best way of doing that is decentralization and limited government, and basically known as federalism. We're still arguing over whether a democracy or a republic, and the answer is neither. We're a bunch of republics. We're supposed to be 13, but then 50 different republics that all under one union for mutual defense and trade together. That's it. So we got a chance to get closer to that than we've ever done in my life, and I'm really optimistic about the future. Let's strike while the iron's hot. Trump's got momentum. There's a lot of great things going on.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Great. Well, Brady, I appreciate you joining us. Let's hit the rants before you get out of here. I do see we have a few Badlands boosts. I'm going to hold off on reading those until Matt is back, because I see some of them are kind of addressed at Matt, or just addressed at conversations we were having last week. So I'll read the Badlands boost. I see they're there, so I just want to let everyone know thank you for the generosity. But I'll save those for when Matt is back, so he can address whatever questions are pointed at him. Ashley D, I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate the rant. Rumbling 1961. So knowing the gold is at Fort Knox really isn't the end of the story. Is it auditing how many people have a claim to each bar? That's part of it, I would say. I mean, part of it is figuring out how much gold is at Fort Knox. That's step one. Like how much, like we just said, how much do they have the 8,000 metric tons? Like that's question one, right? And then after that is answered, let's just say for the sake of argument, yes, every bar of gold they claim to have, they actually do have. Okay, great. Then you have to start working down the line of addressing, what's the word you used to describe that?
The rehypothecation.
Rehypothecation. You just have to address that, and then there's the whole litany of financial instruments that have been used to basically exploit the American people, derivatives and otherwise. That all has to be addressed, but I don't know if those issues are addressed as part of this audit. I think this audit is more about just figuring out how much gold do we actually have. That's step one, and then I think a conversation occurs after that.
So they say, well, what's the dollar amount of all the gold in the world? Is it 20 trillion number the one we're going to go with for now, or in that ballpark, or just in America? There's so many different estimates.
That's what I think your charts, your graphic you showed earlier said. Let me.
Well, if you look at the United States, I've got it right here. Total value is U.S. tons of $730 billion. That's at 2,800 an ounce as of late 2024. So,
and the market cap for gold worldwide is 19.6 trillion. So 20 trillion basically.
Yeah, and I would argue that number is probably double that. But if we get all the gold, what's it going to do to the price? You double the supply, obviously the demand's going to go down. So I don't know if that 20 trillion number may be correct. Bottom line is, just look at the American. What did we just say? It was 8 trillion. Or sorry.
8,000 metrics, you said? Or yeah. I'm sorry. You said it was 700 billion is what I think.
Yeah, 730 billion. It was a recent valuation. Now divide that by 330 million Americans. And it's not that big of a number. You're looking at taking out 1, 2, 3. It's in the thousands per person, like about 22 or 3,000 bucks a person. So, which will actually lead to the argument gold ought to be priced a heck of a lot more expensive than it is. Then I would absolutely say the same thing about silver. I think silver is the more undervalued of the two. Not just because it's got more of a utilitarian function, but it's been manipulated so badly in the sterling markets for so long. And there's actually really good reasons for them to be suppressing the price of silver. I got to get a tinfoil hat on to do that one full credit, but that's something people have been talking about for, since I've been alive, is the silver manipulation. Its historical price relative to gold means should point to silver being about 3 times higher than it is.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point. The one thing we didn't mention was this golden age that many people think we're entering, and for good reason. And this next epoch of technology that I think we're about to see kind of dawn is going to require technologies that are obviously very dependent and reliant on these rare earth metals and the minerals, particularly the minerals that are already found in the DRC. One of them I've recently learned about is called coltan, which apparently is in every single electronic device. I mean, we've heard about lithium, we've heard about silver, tin, these other metals, but there's this one called coltan. And as of right now, 50% of all the coltan in the world comes from the DRC. And a lot of that is illegally smuggled into Rwanda, and then Rwanda organizations there are giving them false certificates saying these are clean minerals. They weren't mined using child slavery or anything like that. And then they're put on the global supply chain, and companies like Apple, Dell, Lockheed Martin, Intel, Sony, they're buying these minerals. And right now there's lawsuits that have been filed, huge lawsuits by the DRC against Apple. There's criminal probes in Europe against Apple for knowing about this, accusing Tim Cook of knowing about this and basically working with these other oligarchs to make it a reality. So all of that needs to be adjudicated, but all that aside, whoever controls these minerals is going to obviously be a very important power player in this next epoch of technology that we're going to enter. So I think that also plays into this whole negotiation with Trump and seizing and, hopefully trying to get control of some of these minerals or at least have a hand in it. So sovereign wealth fund aside, there's certainly some national security implications potentially in having access to these minerals and having a seat at that table.
And that absolutely leads into a couple topics like Space Force and Elon's voyage to Mars, because there's an awful lot of this mineral wealth in the asteroid belts, and we are not that far away from being able to get there. We should be able to bring it back. Now, how are you going to get it back in the atmosphere? I don't know if they've solved it yet, but I know there's some pretty smart people thinking about it. But we only know this by they do some kind of a scope out there. We don't have a whole lot of knowledge of what the makeups of some of these asteroids are. But if the astrophysicists are correct, there are a whole belt of iron or metallic-based class of asteroids that represents far more mineral wealth than we have on the planet as of right now, and that's going to change. And I think, 10 or 20 years, that'll be a reality. So maybe, I don't know. I mean, I've watched as much science fiction as the next person. I know it's theoretical and what may be possible, but they are working on that, because that's where the next frontier is bringing in that asteroid belt mineral wealth, and that will change the world.
Yeah, that's a question for General Quast, our friend General Stephen Quast, who is knowledgeable when it comes to that kind of stuff, space logistics, I believe, as he calls it. So
yeah, I'm out of my league on that. I've gone as far as I can.
You and I both, but it is absolutely fascinating, and I find it very, very interesting as a topic. So awesome, man. Let me make sure we don't have any other rants. Looks like we got it all. Yeah, rumbling was the last one. Great. Well, Brady, we certainly appreciate you joining us. Everyone, please hit the thumbs up on your way out. Brady, do you want to tell everyone where to find you?
Yeah, my Rumble channel, just look up War Space Hamster or War Hamster, one word. We're going to do a lot of videos on the Constitution and a lot of secret society stuff with Colonel Tanner Watkins. We've been going through Skull and Bones really meticulously. Tomorrow will be our 12th episode. And there's some connections there that just tie into everything that Gordon and Matt and me and the Colonel have been talking about, how these oligarchs rule the world. We're actually going and finding out who the puppet masters are, because they are so interconnected, and you really want to check that out. And you can always get me on X at war_hamster1776.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to check out his Rumble channel, because a lot of the knowledge that I have from the CIA, I've known Brady for a while, has come from Brady. So he's educated me immensely when it comes to a lot of these topics. So he is certainly a great source and resource for that knowledge. So
to be fair, I think I just pointed you in the right direction, and you took it from there and actually surpassed me in a lot of topics. So it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, just being pointed in the right direction sometimes is everything. So awesome. Well, thank you, man. I have to switch this to try to get the right outro. So, all right, everyone, have a great day. And Brady, we will talk to you soon.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.